The City of Milwaukee is already working on its 2027 budget, and it's a budget that will have challenges as the city continues to feel some long term financial pressure. Let's get the details on how the budget planning is going from the Mayor of Milwaukee, Cavalier Johnson. Thanks so much for being with us and bringing us up to date on the planning for next year's budget.
Hey, Denise, happy to be with you.
At this time last year in the city's budget process, there was roughly a $100 million budget gap between expected revenue and program cost. What does the budget planning for 2027 look like?
It looks similar. It's in a little better space just because we made some very difficult decisions last year trying to right size our budget and get rid of these structural deficits. So it's shy of what it was. About $101 million in a budget deficit, but it's still a pretty substantial number. It's about $97 million that I'm going to have to find a way to cut, to backfill before I present a balanced budget to the city council in September. So still a lot of challenges that we have to work through.
Have any cuts or changes to federal grants, federal funding, have those impacted the budget and the situation that the city finds itself in?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When the Trump administration came back into office, unfortunately, some of the grants, including competitive grants that the city of Milwaukee had won that we advocated for during President Biden's administration, we lost a number of those grants, some grants totaling tens of millions of dollars that would have helped us to make investments in the city of Milwaukee. So those challenges are very, very real from President Donald Trump's administration, and they have real world impacts for all units of government, from state governments on down to local governments, including us in the city of Milwaukee.
When the legislature passed Act 12, that brought some additional revenues to the city in the terms of the ability to have a new sales tax, also increases in shared revenue. Has that helped some? And what kind of shape would the city be in if that had not happened?
Sure. So, and I worked very closely on Act 12. I famously, I think, said I would have a cot in the Capitol in Madison after I was elected mayor. I did that. And working in partnership with other units of government like Milwaukee County and the county executive, with some folks in the business community, other places, we were able to get the legislature and the governor to come on the same accord to pass Act 12, which did, as you mentioned, bring additional revenues to Milwaukee and to a whole host of other communities all across the state of Wisconsin. So this was a good bill for the finances of local governments across the state. Now, there were challenges associated with the bill, including some financial challenges too. So it didn't solve everything, but it did put us in a stronger position to be able to continue delivering services to the people of Milwaukee. And I think folks, tend to forget about this. So I just want to, be clear, and I'm glad you asked the clarifying question about what would have happened, what would our city have looked like if Act 12 had not been passed and we just continued on the status quo. So what would have happened is that we would have essentially had to slash half of the Milwaukee Police Department, right? So the police department would have been totally ineffective. We would have had to get rid of, I believe, a quarter of the Milwaukee Fire Department, which, as of not just this year, but last year, certainly think about the fires that we had on Mother's Day and other places, what that response would have looked like if we had a reduced a fire department response. The hundreds of other city employees, think about public health nurses, folks that, fill potholes, things like that. We've had to slash, hundreds and hundreds of those jobs, folks who collect your garbage and your recycling. Think about just this past winter that we had and the difficulty that we had with filling potholes. Just imagine what that would have looked like if we had a reduced number of folks in the Department of Public Works. So there were real world consequences, not to mention the library, which we basically would have had to shutter the entire system. So there were a lot of challenges, poison pills that Republicans included in Act 12 that I didn't want, that nobody wanted, but we had to put the city of Milwaukee in a position to fight another day, to be able to continue delivering services for our constituents that they deserve and they expect. And that's exactly what we did. And if we didn't do it, that's what the world would have looked like in Milwaukee.
One of the challenges that I've often heard and still hear elected leaders talking about is that while there have been some improvements in shared revenue, you're kind of behind the eight ball because for so many years, for decades in some cases, shared revenue increases didn't keep up with the rate of inflation. So that's one of the things that communities are dealing with now. There's more money, but you were starting at a place where you're already behind.
Yeah, that's a huge driving factor. I think that doesn't get a lot of attention here. I think a lot of times because people they interact with me, they see me on the news, they see me in public, like I'm very approachable. People can touch me and talk to me, and the same is not true necessarily of the folks in Madison who make decisions that trickle down to us at the local level. And so you're right, Denise, in terms of shared revenue and that partnership, that promise that state government made to local governments being broken. And unfortunately, that's the case. Shared revenue worked very well for a number of decades, but unfortunately, the state decided that they were going to not continue to increase shared revenue at the rate of inflation, that they were not going to send those dollars back to local governments, that they were going to keep those dollars for themselves to solve their own budget issues, that they were not going to make investments in the local governments where really for folks in Wisconsin, where the rubber meets the road. We're the ones at the local level that collect the trash. We're the ones that plow the snow. We're the ones that collect the leaves. We're the ones that fill the potholes. We're the ones that deliver services like libraries and health departments and things like that, not the state. And so when they keep those dollars, it unfortunately puts us in a situation where we have to try to find a way in order to keep those services that people, again, deserve and expect running. So today, if the state had kept up with inflation, they continued to increase shared revenue like they promised to do, the city of Milwaukee should have about $250 million more that we receive from state government. Instead, as we discussed, I'm looking at nearly $100 million budget deficit that I've got to climb out of.
How do you begin to climb out of that? Are there some things that you would hope to be able to hold harmless?
You know, I always work every single year when I'm crafting the budget to try to hold our city employees again because they're the ones that ultimately deliver the services to our constituents. I try to hold them as harmless as possible. I try to avoid layoffs where possible. But we, many times find ourselves in a position where we have to make some difficult choices, where we have to shrink the number of positions, not hire for a position. Say we're not doing, this particular service anymore, or switch the way in which we're doing it to provide some greater efficiency. Which I'm happy to have efficiency, but the problem is though, right? If I'm reducing the number of people who are doing a certain part of a government function and putting more pressure on existing employees, that creates burnout, which forces people then, to look for employment and opportunities elsewhere. That lack of consistency, that lack of built-in knowledge and expertise does not help to serve the citizen well. So I try my best in these budget conversations that I have with my staff to hold our folks harmless each and every single time that I put a budget together. It's getting more difficult as the years go by because we still have this broken system of shared revenue in the state of Wisconsin. I would love to go back to the days where shared revenue eclipsed property taxes. Some years ago, because of the same challenges that we talked about, where the state made decisions to withhold resources, not just from Milwaukee, but local governments all over the state, that axis has changed, where property taxes now exceed shared revenue payments from the state of Wisconsin. That's wrong. It doesn't allow us to serve constituents in Milwaukee and other communities as best as we possibly can. And just one final note on this here, I think, folks see what's happening in the city. We're the biggest, city, the largest community with the largest government outside, I believe, the state of Wisconsin's government here. And we have, our issues of working to balance our budgets. But in other communities, including wealthy communities like Brookfield, they too are having issues. And if the state's funding formula for municipalities is not working for communities as wealthy as Brookfield, then it's just broken. It's just broken. And that's what we need to fix in this state.
Mayor, it is a big challenge that lies ahead of you, and we really thank you for taking time to explain to us what's going on in Milwaukee and also what other communities are experiencing as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
We are back in just a moment.